use one thing I like to desire? That's a difficult question.
Hello, welcome to today's crypto interviews. My name is Claudio, and this is Cryptochain, the channel that brings you crypto news, reviews, tutorials, and interviews with a focus on the Kusama ecosystems. And joining me today is Derek Yoo, co-founder of Purestake, the team behind Moonbeam and Moonriver, which I'm sure you've probably heard of if you've been watching this channel for the last while, especially in the last year, because I've been covering Moonriver and Moonbeam quite a lot, quite heavily. And today we'll finally get a chance to ask Derek what's going on with Moonbeam, with Moonriver, what is their future, what are they up to, because things are about to get excited, especially with all the things that we've seen with Moonriver and Moonbeam, all the integrations. Derek, welcome. And if you want to just quickly give us a bit of background about yourself to people who don't know who you are. I'm sure everyone does, but just in case, you know, there will always be some new people who don't know.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm Derek. I work at Purestake, and we're one of the main development companies developing the Moonbeam and Moonriver protocols. And yeah, the quick version of my background, it is a little bit unusual relative to maybe some other Web3 project founders. I have a pretty extensive background from Web2. So worked on a number of software companies in the Web2 space. Before coming to Web3 and crypto and Polkadot and the thinking of the Moonbeam and Moonriver projects. I think that's actually helped me quite a bit because a lot of the ideas and things that I learned from Web2 are applicable in Web3. I think a lot of times Web3 founders are first-time founders, so I have this experience. I think has been quite helpful in just kind of the kinds of team building, recruiting, like what kinds of especially some of the non-technical functions. So things like marketing, business development, ecosystem development. These are areas I would say that sometimes people will think less about because they're focused primarily on the tech. But in my view, you need like all of these different elements to come together to have a successful project.
Nice. And what made you come to Polkadot and Kusama, and more so Kusama at the beginning, because we all know you started off with Moonriver, and that's been a big hit for you guys, not only in terms of development, in terms of dApps that have built on Moonriver, but also the price itself. Although I know we don't like to talk about prices all the time, but sometimes it's worth noting that does actually help bring attention to a project as well. And then they get to learn more about the tech when they see that happening. So what brought you to that? How did you come to Kusama?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of a long-ranging vision that I have, and and let me explain what that is, and then once you understand that, I think the Polkadot becomes quite obvious, like why that was a choice. So the longer-ranging vision is that even though right now there's only some smaller number of blockchains, my belief is that there's going to be many blockchains in the future. And it's this incredibly useful thing. It's this incredibly useful infrastructure that allows you to build like new kinds of apps that are really change the way that especially value is moved around. And so these financial apps I think are going to be completely changed by Web3 technology, even though we're just starting to see that happen. And so if you buy that vision that there's going to be many blockchains, then you kind of are led to different questions. Okay, so where are they going to be built? And like if there's going to be many, how do they communicate with each other? And so it's with those questions in mind, even some over 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, that I started looking around and saying, okay, well, where is it that one can build like blockchains, and how is it that they can communicate with each other? And this is where this is what led me to Substrate and to Polkadot in the first place. Even though it wasn't launched yet, they had like a specific. They kind of matched with that vision, right? They said, okay, we're going to create this this platform and this set of tools that allow developers to create blockchains with a lot more efficiently than has been the case in the past. And on top of that, we also built in this kind of networking technology, this like messaging technology, XCM, that allows these blockchains to talk to each other. And so, those two ideas I still think are very, very powerful ideas. Frankly, I think are still like not all that well understood by the broader market that are going to drive a lot of change. I mean, right now, I think there is this kind of very binary choice. If you're looking to build your own blockchain, you really only have one of two choices. You can either use the Cosmos SDK and build in the Cosmos ecosystem, or you can use Substrate and build in the Polkadot ecosystem.
I was just about to ask you that. Sorry to jump in. I was actually going to ask you, how come you guys didn't choose Cosmos instead of Polkadot? Because Cosmos were already built back then and you were already launched. Was there a reason behind that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and and I think the Cosmos ecosystem is great. And we have a number of collaborators and other folks we work with in the Cosmos ecosystem. I would say that for us, a few reasons. One is that I think the architecture of Polkadot, it's this more structured system, right? So in Cosmos, the kind of the idea or the philosophy is you have these standalone chains, they're all independent in their own right, and then you can kind of optionally set up these like messaging connections like with other chains. And so I call it, a little bit jokingly, I call it more the European model, right? So you have these different countries, they can kind of have these like trade agreements with each other optionally maybe. Whereas, Polkadot is like much more like a single system, right? So you're a single system, you can create these parachains, which are unique and have their own functionality and their own, things that they're good at, but you're all plugged into the same system. So you have shared security, you have this like, you don't have to do anything extra to like pass messages, for example, right? So in Cosmos, you need these relayers that are additional infrastructure that gets stood up to send IBC messages, whereas in Polkadot, that's all kind of built in. And so my feeling was that, my joke is that I'm an American, so maybe this more federal, like structured model, like made more sense to me, versus a European, might gravitate more towards Cosmos. But jokes aside, I do think that so my vision is that, I actually think that like this ability to build your own blockchain, that it's going to evolve the same way that computing evolved. So in the early days of building computers, they were very expensive. They were like, it took a lot of energy to run. And then so you had many people sharing the same computer, right? You had time sharing, and you had this thing where people were sharing the scarce resource. Then you had a situation where everyone could get their own, right? You had like PC. So then it's like, okay, everyone has their own, great. And there's all these things you can do when you have your own. You can kind of control the whole thing. And then you kind of move to this cloud era where there's like many specialized systems they're kind of jointly working together to serve like some like large number of users. And so this kind of is the long run vision for me, is that like there's going to be these many specialized blockchains that are going to work together. Like app developers will choose which ones to like stitch together to create like a single user experience. So for me, like the Polkadot architecture made more sense for that long-term vision versus this standalone chain idea, which I feel like is maybe more, you hear this term app chain, which is more of the second phase where it's like, okay, I just want my own chain to do things, so I'm maybe trying to look out a little bit further. This is where Polkadot made more sense to me. And there's other like smaller reasons. So for example, like I think we preferred Rust to Golang as a language, like a lot of the team. So, there's other sometimes less philosophical reasons like why you might choose one thing or another.
Yeah. No, absolutely makes sense. And I know that from a developer standpoint, Rust is definitely one of those programming languages that is more sought after if you're an experienced developer, because you can control things differently, such as memory, you can customize things, and it doesn't actually allow developers to write bad code, from what I was told. So it kind of enforces good code practice as well.
Yeah, you can always build bad code, but I think at least it spares you from some of the worst like problems that
exactly.
that people make when they're using things like C++.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the things. And so I want to talk to you about Moonriver. So we know that you started with Moonriver, okay, on Kusama, but now we're seeing the focus kind of switch more to Moonbeam, and we're seeing all the hype with Moonbeam. We're seeing more integrations with Moonbeam. But the question is, what is the plan for Moonriver? I mean, we've seen what Kilt has done. They've decided to come off Kusama altogether and move to Polkadot. So, I mean, do you see a similar vision going forward for Moonriver and Moonbeam?
No, I mean, definitely not. And I would say that while there's been many different ideas about these networks, so some of the core ideas that led to the creation of Moonriver like remain the same. So the original idea that Parity had was this idea of the canary net. And so the idea is that you have this blockchain mainnet, and it has value on it, and it's you want to kind of imagine a world where you can update the software with great frequency. That's one of the key strengths of Substrate and Polkadot, is that it has these built-in mechanisms for updating the blockchain. And it's much easier to update the logic of the blockchain with a substrate-based chain than with other kinds of chains where you need to do this hard fork. And even you look at Moonbeam Moonriver, like we have like a monthly release chain. Every 4 to 6 weeks, there's like new runtime updates that are shipped that have new features, have performance improvements, have bug fixes. This is part of what makes Moonbeam great, is that this ability to adapt to like new things that are coming up, to changing market conditions, to needs of developers that are building. Like there's an ability to react to like the feedback that is coming from the community. So all those things are great. Now the problem is, of course, that when you update things, it's always like a little bit there's risks basically.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like these systems are quite complex. And so I think this idea of the canary net to say, hey, let's have this environment. It has real value on it. So it has like, realistic, it's like a realistic environment, but it's a place where changes will happen first. And so you kind of have an opportunity to get the latest changes, but perhaps in exchange, there is like a little bit of a different like risk profile where they're coming there first. So then, there could be, this is the whole expect chaos thing from, if you remember, that's how like Kusama was
Yeah.
originally branded. And so we buy into that idea. So, I mean, we have many different ways. I mean, we're very much into figuring out the safest way to deploy changes. And that involves, there's a lot of work that's been done even before it hits Moonriver, right? There's many different environments. We have, a very extensive test automation kind of suite that like runs a whole series of automated tests to ensure, the quality of the code that's being deployed is there. But I see like this movement of like new code through this process that then will hit Moonriver, and then it stays there for some amount of time, and then it moves to Moonbeam. That's all part of how we're able to ship like good quality code basically to the network.
Right.
And so I think that need is always there. So there's no reason like why we would ever stop maintaining or stop shipping updates to Moonriver. And by the way, these are community-led things. So the community there's already this very strong community around Moonriver. And obviously there's like a lot of people that call it home. So I don't see like why, obviously that's something that's valuable and should be maintained.
Yeah, I guess my concern, so now I understand that the team actually want to keep both chains alive, which makes sense because you're always going to push those updates on Moonriver first, then Moonbeam. But my concern is more about the pushing of the actual product out to developers want to build. So the layer twos, they seem to be choosing Moonbeam more over Moonriver right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is mostly because Moonbeam is more mature now. It already has a number of dApps on it. It's not like back in the day when you only had Moonriver and Moonbeam were just recently launched. And so, are you concerned about the fact that more teams are going to be developing on Moonbeam and it'll get to a point where Moonbeam is going to be saturated, whereas Moonriver is not going to have as many dApps and it's mostly going to be the same ones, and maybe some of them will be dying out as well in time if the bear market continues? Do you see that as a concern going forward?
Not really, because I think there's there seems to be a quite strong community, and there's developers like around like Moonriver, and I think also both Moonbeam and Moonriver actually I think they are starting to have a bit of a important kind of special place within each of their respective ecosystems, right? So I think that within the context of Kusama and Polkadot, both Moonriver and Moonbeam seem like it's kind of a concentration point of activity, particularly when it comes to DeFi venues, right? So for DeFi venues, given this XC20 integrations that we have with other parachains, that it seems to be kind of the de facto destination, for people to access like certain kinds of services. So I see that demand as, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't continue. And so like on Kusama, like, Moonriver is serving that purpose basically. And by the way, we still do continue to see parachain teams that are launching on Kusama and choosing Kusama over over Polkadot. It might be because it's cheaper. It might be, there might be a number of reasons for that. So I think there's a long-term commitment to Moonriver. And it may be that there's different use cases. So it might not be that there's the same use cases on each chain. But this is the way, you create these things, and then they're community driven and they take on a life of their own, right? So that people choose, they're permissionless, and people choose to deploy where it makes sense for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you're always giving people the choice. They know that they have these two ecosystems and they can choose between each one, whichever they want. And I want to ask you a question about the gaming narrative, because I remember when you were invited to a Twitter space by Polka House, you are saying that you're looking more into gaming now when it comes to integrations, and you're going to try and attract gamers. Have you worked with any gamers, any gaming companies so far, and have you seen any of that, any of that interest, or do you know what's going on that front?
Yeah, I think I've learned more since then. There's always a constant process of learning here. So here's what I'd say about that I think that right now on both Moonriver and Moonbeam, the kinds of games that you see there are what I would call more casual games. And so what do I mean by casual games? That means games where it might be that like once a day, someone will, engage with the game, perform some set of actions, do something, harvest some materials, these kinds of things. And I think I contrast that a little bit with games where it's more of a real-time thing, right? So it might be, real time where there's a lot of like heavy interaction, like with the chain like involved. And so I think a lot of the games that I see that are being created by like, larger studios fall into that second category. And from discussions with them, like what they are looking for often is they want like a full dedicated chain to themselves, basically.
Right.
They want like a full EVM, as an example, to themselves. And you can see this in other ecosystems. For example, in Avalanche, their like EVM subnets like allows for, even with reduced security, but like it allows for like a full EVM to be used by a game. Like for example, DeFi Kingdoms has like a version on Avalanche, right, that's using a subnet like right now. And so I think that it's become clear to me that to be competitive from an infrastructure perspective for some of these like studio-led games, you need this ability to be able to create like basically like dedicated like EVMs for them. Now that is something that we are that is like under like R&D now, like of how to do that. The idea might be to be able to have sub moonbeams, right, or like dedicated like moonbeams on demand. That's still in the kind of the R&D phase, but that is something that at least is being researched as to like how that could work like within the Polkadot architecture. One of the ways I think that could work would be using this new parathread technology, like would be an interesting way to do this. And I think that the idea, once that comes to life, if and when that comes to life, Polkadot has some like real advantages there where you can use this XCM technology then to, even though you have a dedicated EVM, you still have access then to like, the venues on Moonbeam and other services that are like on other parachains. And so that is like quite a bit better, I think, than other versions of this, where sometimes, in the worst case, you just have like a standalone, like, Geth, like fork kind of standalone blockchain. It isn't really connected to anything else. And so, but yeah, that's at least the direction that I'm thinking in. And it's part of this longer term vision I described before with many chains, that I think it fits into that, where I actually think like on the longer run, that the block space itself may become quite commoditized. If you have this ability to spin up moonbeams on demand, maybe it's the block space is like less valuable than like the L1's considered to be now, but it's really more this coordination effort and the connections and messaging that become like more important. The orchestration of these different environments becomes more important than the actual block space itself. And so
Absolutely.
that's what I think might happen in the longer run.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I mean, the idea of having a standalone chain just for the games, that would be something. I mean, if you guys can nail that, I'm sure it's going to work out great for the future of both Moonbeam and Moonriver. And
I will say there is some announcements I would point to here that, as an example, there are L2s like in flight to Moonbeam. There is, for example, Boba is a layer 2 technology that's on Ethereum mainnet now that is deployed to Moonbeam, or that will be going live on Moonbeam quite shortly. And so that again is something that offers that could be used for games, because it has is optimized for throughput. Whereas Moonbeam base layer has really been optimized for compatibility and for cross-chain scenarios for these like messaging transports. That's the vision for Moonbeam is to be this kind of hub of like messaging and coordination activity. Whereas an L2 on top, just like on Ethereum, it can then be optimized more for, hey, like I just want like raw throughput. Like what is like the most raw throughput we can have.
Interesting. And what about Metaverse? I mean, integrating Moonbeam and Moonbeam in a metaverse, maybe the community, for example. Let's say you want to build a metaverse specific for educating the community about, I don't know, future tutorials, future updates, AMAs, anything that you may want to hold with the community in a metaverse. I mean, are you thinking to collaborate with the likes of Bitcountry, for example, who have just recently launched their product, their parachain, and are soon to launch the metaverse and to make it public? I mean, are you considering these options as well?
Yeah, I think that again, we're the Purestake team. We're infrastructure like software developers, right? So like when it comes to more apps, things like metaverses, the DeFi protocols, games. I mean, this is not our area of expertise. Like we see ourselves as creating software that provides like this Web3 infrastructure. And so are we going to create our own like metaverse? No, I can guarantee you that that's not the case. Could it be deployed onto Moonbeam? Sure. I mean, I think that's like, for example, Donnie, I know, has like some projects that, are kind of going in this direction that are deployed onto Moonbeam. Yeah. But, the vision of Polkadot having specialized parachains that are optimized for particular use cases, I think that, that's a great example, right? So Bitcountry is a, parachain that is specifically been built to support a metaverse use case. And so integrating with them makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, this is kind of the vision of, you have multiple blockchains, but really, when those can communicate, it opens the door for specialization, where you can specialize in being good at like one thing, really good at one thing, and then for the things you're not good at, you can outsource them to whoever it is that is good at that thing. So in the case of Bitcountry, so they've optimized their chain for metaverse use cases, great. But maybe there's NFTs or other fungible tokens that might, make sense to transfer them to Moonbeam to access DeFi venues. I'm just making stuff up now, but that could be an example, right? Where you can use each chain for its like specialized purpose.
No, absolutely interesting. And let's move on and switch the context to EVM. So we know that you guys are focused on the EVM. I mean, that's the main thing. That's EVM-based smart contracts is what actually made Moonbeam and Moonriver start off with, and how they've kicked things off. But I mean, what do you think about WASM? Do you see any future in that? Because we have seen other projects which are on Polkadot and Kusama working towards that. I mean, do you see Moonbeam and Moonriver also integrating WASM as part of the infrastructure?
So just to step back, like why? Well, let me answer the first question, like why EVM? Like, so there was choices that were before us as a team in terms of implementation, and we chose EVM. And I would say that this is one of those things to tie back to my experience, like with building Web2 companies, cloud companies. That when we looked at this, basically when you're trying to like create a platform to to acquire developers, to work on it, it's the developer tools that is the key thing, right? It really is like the very key thing is like, what is what are the maturity and quality of the tools, and are they tools that developers already know how to use, languages they already know how to use, are they comfortable using them? I think this is an area that gets like underestimated quite a bit, right? When people say, well, let me create, this language is better, or this, this other technology stack is better. But there's is the EVM great at everything? No, but it has like the most mature. It's the most mature technology stack, right? It has like the most mature tools around it. It has like a number of infrastructure providers. It has all these different protocols that can be integrated with it. And we see that on like Moonbeam Moonriver today. I can see that there's like a huge number of like integrations. And I credit that to this adoption of the EVM. So that was very intentional on our part, saying the way to reduce the friction to the minimum in terms of developer adoption would be to adopt this EVM approach, because it has the best tools and it opens the door for the most possible number of integrations. And so I think that largely has worked. I mean, I think that was correct. If I look back, that I wouldn't have chosen any other way. That's correct. And that's why in my opinion, that's the key reason, like why there is, a relatively high amount of developer adoption, like on Moonriver and Moonbeam compared to like other chains that may have taken a different approach. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that other approaches aren't good, aren't worthwhile, aren't worth pursuing, aren't going to be better, like from a performance or other standpoint. I just think, again, that this, it takes like longer than you think to create like all of these tools like around a given technology. And so I think, my take right now is, even now, like the Ink programming language and WASM like on Polkadot is at like a much lesser state of maturity than the EVM technology set. Would would Moonbeam or Moonriver ever incorporate like a WASM like engine like onto the chains? I don't think so, because I think it's probably something where, again, back to that idea of chains should specialize and be good at one thing. Like, it makes more sense to have that as its own chain. I think it could be its own parachain that specializes just in providing the best like WASM environment. And I think, as we've been looking at this, the thing I'm more interested in is being able to provide a way for developers to use Substrate to express, chain level logic and run it in a way that is less difficult than going through the entire parachain lifecycle, right? To launch a parachain is actually like not that easy, right? There's a whole lifecycle. There's a crowd loan. There's all these like steps basically to launching a parachain.
Yeah.
But Substrate is very powerful. So I think the thing that one of the other R&D efforts that we have going on is around figuring out a way to create an environment where developers can express logic in Substrate, run it like, maybe as this upcoming parathread. It doesn't exist yet, but that's going to be one of the technologies that people will be able to use to do that. But to then link it so that if you have a Moonbeam smart contract, you can use XCM to call out to like the logic that's been created like in Substrate. And so then that also helps support richness on Moonbeam, where as a developer, you not only have Solidity as a way to express yourself in EVM, but you can also use Substrate to help support your application. That's I think the vision that we're after. And yeah, so does that, that's maybe not exactly what you're saying, but it's somewhere in the direction of what you're saying.
Yeah, no, my question was more in relation to, is it possible to also integrate WASM and maybe Ink as part of the Moonbeam parachain? But now what you basically told me is that because of the complexity of setting up the SDK, it would make more sense to have maybe a parathread dedicated with that technology, right? rather than use it within the same parachain.
Either parathread or yeah, I mean, I think it deserves to be its own parachain.
Or its own parachain, yeah, because there are other projects on Polkadot building right now. I don't want to be mentioning names in this video, but I know that they've told me that they can actually launch multiple parachains as part of the same team, as part of the same vision and the roadmap. So, I mean, that shouldn't stop Moonbeam from doing the same thing eventually if they want. Cool, thank you for that. And now I do have a question from a community member with regards to Uniswap integrations for Moonbeam and Moonriver. Can you tell me more about that, please?
I think that's still a work in progress. There are still more steps that need to happen before Uniswap v3 deployment is realized on Moonbeam. So yeah, I think there's there was like a whole governance vote that happened that was voted. It went through the full life cycle of the of the Uniswap governance process on mainnet with Uni token holders both doing first a temperature check and then doing a full vote. The Moonbeam Foundation did commit, as part of that public proposal, for like grant support among other things, to help support that deployment. But I do think that there are still some steps that need to be taken. So it's not, it's still being worked through, like what that process looks like.
Right. And will the plan be to have both Moonriver and Moonbeam integrated, or is it just Moonbeam?
I think that if you look at the proposal that was put forth, that was voted on, it was for Moonbeam only.
Moonbeam only. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. And yeah, I do have another question in relation to just the future of the cross-chain aspect. So are you planning collaborations at the moment, or do you have any collaborations planned with say other blockchains like Avalanche, Cosmos, maybe Solana? And if so, which ones, and what kind of integrations are you planning with them?
Yeah, I would say that this is kind of the vision and the nature of what is happening right now. Frankly, it's developer-led, right, in terms of developers pursuing what we call cross-chain connected applications on Moonbeam. And so the way I see it is that there's multiple messaging transports that are available these days. And we want Moonbeam to have as many of these as possible. One of them is unique to Moonbeam, is that because we're a parachain, we have access to send and receive XCM messages from other parachains. That's one. But there are others as well. So as an example, there is today, Axelar is one cross-chain messaging system that's available on Moonbeam. Layer 0 recently completed their integration, I expect there's a number of others that are in flight basically to integrate Moonbeam. All of the major ones will be supported on Moonbeam. And so I think what we see happening is developers that want to build one of these cross-chain connected applications using messaging to connect their contracts, a lot of them need to reach destinations outside of Kusama. I mean, they need to get to Ethereum mainnet, they need to get to Polygon, BSC, these other destinations. And so they need an ability to use these other messaging systems which offer routes to those destinations. In particular, I'd say that there's a number of teams already using either Axelar or Layer 0 for this purpose, right? So that they can have a set of smart contracts on Moonbeam that are interacting with and working with smart contracts that are deployed on these other EVM chains, particularly Ethereum mainnet, but even other EVM chains. And so that's happening already. That's happening today. And I think this is kind of the future, is that there's going to be multiple different, I call them messaging transports, right? I built different ways that you can send messages. It's not just going to be one. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you route messages between these different networks? How do you protect your smart contracts against threats that are coming in from messages? These are the kinds of things that we're starting to see. But yeah, for sure, it's basically the nature of the interaction with these other L1s you mentioned is via these different messaging protocols like Axelar, Layer 0, Wormhole, others like this.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like we're going to get more integrations soon. I'm sure everyone is excited about the Uniswap one. That's probably the biggest one that everyone's waiting for, to get Moonbeam out there and into the spotlight to the masses. Cool. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate you coming on and giving us an update on Moonbeam and Moonriver. I do have one final question before I close this, because it is the first time you're on here, and that is, what is one thing in life that you truly desire?
Geez, something I truly desire. That's a difficult question.
Yeah,
I would say that, I mean, if I look at why it is that I'm motivated to continue to work a lot on these projects, it's because I actually think that this Web3 technology like has within it the potential to really make some sort of like positive change in the world. I'm kind of always sometimes it gets joked about on my team. I'm always this kind of default positive, like, optimistic, like outlook on things. And so I really believe that the Web3 technologies have this ability to coordinate people in like novel ways, to reduce like centralized like risks, to like, create like more like access fairness, like for different kinds of services, to change the way financial services like applications are made and, created and consumed. And so I feel, yeah, in fact, I feel good about like being part of that story and like helping like, create those things that will make, these new kind of apps possible. And yeah, I mean, I'd sleep well at night, like contributing towards that.
Interesting. Yes, so Web3 is the future. Cool. Thank you very much, Derek. I appreciate you coming on. If you want to check out Moonbeam, I will be posting links to the official website in the description of this video, and also a link to their Twitter page or Telegram if you want to join their community full of helpful admins. If you have any questions, they'll be happy to answer as soon as possible. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.